This is the outer stem at the aft end of the boat. This chunk of wood makes this boat look absolutely robust and seaworthy. Now we're adding some beef. I encountered the fact that the shape of the hull has a new wrinkle from when this was laminated, and that's the fact that we now have a keelson coming back inside the planking that we mated with the inner stem and then faired to what we imagined was the shape. So the outer stem requires a little shaping and fitting to meet this new profile. We planed this profile. That's our inner stem. And as I was planing, I wanted to keep track of this width of the reveal, because both theoretically and practically that width is that width. And if you go too far, you end up setting yourself up for a lot of body work to try to make it look right. The work to be done on this stem, now that it reasonably fits the shape of the hull back here, is first and foremost to keep track of the fact that it's going to meet and join an outer keel member. That's probably going to be my cut, and I'll make the outer keel section match that. We also have some shaping to do to this. This stem is going to be beveled and shaped in this dimension so that it's actually theoretically a 7/8 inch wide top. If I bevel this to a 7/8 inch face all the way around, about the time I go rudder hardware shopping, I'm going to have boxed myself into a corner, because you're not going to find 7/8 inch wide gudgeons, I don't think. I certainly don't. The ones I use on these boats I happen to know are 1.25 inches wide. So somewhere back here, the plans look like the water line is right in here somewhere, and the rudder, the lower gudgeon, mounts about right here. Somewhere in this area, I like to theorize and execute a transition between the 7/8 narrow go fast part of the stem and widening that face out to 1.25 inches, so the gudgeons I like to use will mount and not look like they don't fit. Getting ready to lay out and bevel this outer stem, the first thing to do is give yourself a center line as a reference point. It can stay there till you paint the boat. It's a handy thing to know and have, so do it while it's square and easy to mark. Ian wants the finished face to be 7/8. So I'm laying that out off the center line. Half of 7/8 is 7/16, so I imagine I've marked 7/16 on either side. And I'm going to set my combination square to that mark and draw what will become the outer edges of that beveled face. This is an idea of what the transition between the fat part of the stem and the skinny part of the stem is going to look like. And this is what's going to happen on the face. And I just know from having done it and with the tools I'm going to use that there'll be a reveal of a scallop something like this. See how we look. It fits well enough now that it only goes in one place. we are milling the first piece of our outer keel, the transition piece that's going to go from the back of the centerboard slot to meet that after stem. And I want to go ahead and mill it to the taper that will meet the back stem. And I've got in my pocket a boat builder's bevel gauge, which is made nice and small so you can get into corners on the inside of a boat. And I'll judge that so it matches. And then pull out a handy trick here, a bevel board. Sliding it along till it matches. I'm going to call this bevel 13 degrees. And that should be 13, and the bevel gauge thinks it is too. This is the vicinity of where things go, and we need to make this joint now. I'm building the outer keel structure on this boat in multiple pieces. This version of Ian's plans actually specify everything from here to the front stem as one piece of wood. That's doable, but it is going to be a complex milling and carving and sculpting project. The original version of the boat had it in multiple pieces. That's really easy to do. We're going to give the back end transitioning from the 1-inch depth of the rail strips alongside the centerboard trunk up to the 2-inch laminated depth of the back stem. We'll draw and make a cut on this keel member now while we can get it to the bandsaw. And that'll save us a lot of planing at a later date. It's great when it finally fits because you can feel it sock home. That's where it wants to be. And this is ready for mounting on the boat. This has been 20 minutes of back and forth, check and rub, grub. Did a little bandsaw cut up here to start to account for the transition from the inner stem to the keelson and garboard. And that'll hold it in place while we rough fit the keel member that joins to it. Yeah. I have cut the transition joint between the stem and this aft keel piece, beveled it. They're all tacked in place now, no epoxy yet, but they are screwed down, which allowed me to lay out and fit keel strips alongside the centerboard slot. And they have to be notched a little bit to account for the width of the keel members. The same treatment has happened at the front where the strips meet the forward keel. From there, this forward keel piece is 1 inch by 1 3/4 inches, has a little bevel on it to match this. I'll tune that eventually. And it's actually sprung to the rocker on the keel of the boat. It's not cut in a curve. That 1 inch piece, once I cut this matching joint, I tacked it down with a fairly hefty screw and then put my knee on it and tacked it down back here to spring it to the boat. And that's what I'll do when we epoxy it onto the boat, is we'll fasten one end, put some weight on it, namely my left knee, put this screw in, and it'll be epoxied to match the curve of the boat. The transition between the outer stem and the first keel unit is, visually it needs to be fair. Hydrodynamically that needs to be a fair transition. Fact is, it's underwater, so whatever it looks like is only going to bother the fish and how fast you go. I just clamped a batten on to give me an idea of what the curve in the keel looked like to continue on through here, so I know where this cut is. And what happens up here is, frankly, between you, yourself, and your conscience as far as what Ian drew. My general principle is to draw this as I just did with a batten, cut it on the bandsaw, mount the thing, let the epoxy cure, then get up here with tools like a belt sander and fare this knob into a smooth transition. This is a big fat bead of well-mixed epoxy thickened with filleting compound for structural adhesive work that is going to fasten our outer stem to the hull. And I might even, just to be sure I've filled any gaps, once I spread it, dress another bead right up the center, but this looks like a nice amount. Just want to be sure not to leave any voids anywhere. I might have been a little stingy right down the center, so I'm just going to put a little more crown in it. Got a couple of craftily pre-positioned witness marks here that once I feel a little bit for that screw hole, there it is, that's positioned right. There, I am leaning into this to try to seat it well. And I felt that go right to the screw hole. I have squeeze out everywhere, and now it would behoove me to clean that up. I like to do just a little bit of a coved fillet. The forward section of the outer keel has a joint with the stem. I've buttered both of those faces to make sure I get that. And since this is sprung, I've got to get this end down. And I felt the screw go home in its original hole. Here's how much this springs, and that's not excessive effort. Obviously I'm holding it with one thumb. We're not talking 400 pounds per square inch or anything. But as it springs, the shape is in our favor, and we see the squeeze out on the seam, and I can run right back while I'm up here, pick up the excess, and we'll keep on keeping on. Okay, I did make a witness mark, which is right there. It's in kind of a silly place, so it's going to make me fish for the middle screw. The important thing to pay attention to in fitting these strips that run alongside the box slot, when you fasten them on for good, make sure you fasten them as nearly flush to the box edge as you can, or the trunk edge as you can, because it is a nightmare of an awkward place to get to fare and clean and sand and buff and so forth. The cleaner and squarer it is from day one, the happier you'll be as you try to finish out and fit out this boat. A little back filling where those overlap the keel. Rather than try to back bevel the inside faces of these strips to fit the bevel on the keel, I've taken the gentleman's way out left them square and knew I'd have epoxy in a pastry bag and it would be so easy to fill them. We are pulling the screws that clamped our keel structure in place while the epoxy cured, and I've learned the hard way that there's enough epoxy in these joints that the screws are essentially also glued into the boat. And a simple trick to ease them out and not break them off is to heat them up. And the best way I found to apply direct heat without setting the boat on fire is to put a big screwdriver in the screw head and then heat that with the torch. And just sit still and be patient, and a couple of minutes will take care of it, and then ease it out. This is the last big step on the outside of the hull. We want to fair the stems and the outer keel structure into each other. There are no measurements to go to. We know that this is about how thick it's supposed to be, and that somewhere up here we want the 2-inch thickness. That I only worked from here to here, and that made a dramatic change. Well, that's way more better. I can see I'm a little canted this way, so I'm going to level that out. But the rest of this is within 1 stroke or 2 of being ready for the belt sander to dress it up. That is the end. I'm going to call that the end of building the hull.